A former canine German Shepherd was found frozen on the roadside with her 2 puppies, until a soldier saw the unthinkable. Out there on a desolate, icy road, a former canine German Shepherd lay frozen beside her 2 tiny puppies, clinging to life. Everyone who passed by thought she was already gone. Just another sad casualty of a cruel winter. But when a soldier on leave noticed something no one else had, everything changed. What he did next will leave you absolutely speechless. This is a story of courage, loyalty, and a second chance that will touch your heart in ways you won't soon forget. Before we dive into this incredible journey, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. Your support helps us bring more inspiring stories like this to you every week. The early morning wind howled across the abandoned highway, carrying with it a chill that cut straight to the bone. Snow drifted across the cracked pavement, piling up in uneven mounds where no cars had passed in hours. It was a desolate stretch of road that few dared to travel during the dead of winter. And that's where Staff Sergeant Daniel Reeves saw her. At first, he thought it was just another mound of snow, a shape half buried against the shoulder of the road. But something caught his trained eye. A glimmer of brown beneath the ice. A twitch. The faintest sign of life. Daniel slammed on the brakes, his truck skidding slightly on the slick surface. Heart pounding, he threw open the door and sprinted toward the shape, the cold slapping his face like knives. When he reached it, his heart nearly shattered. There, curled protectively around 2 tiny whimpering puppies, was a German Shepherd. Her body was covered in frost, her breaths shallow and ragged. The puppies huddled against her, barely moving, their tiny bodies trembling from the cold. Daniel dropped to his knees. "Hey girl," he whispered urgently, stripping off his thick jacket and laying it gently over the shivering family. "Hang on, I've got you." The mother lifted her head weakly at the sound of his voice, her eyes meeting his for a brief, heartbreaking moment. There was pain there, but also something else: trust. Daniel's heart twisted. He had served alongside K9 units during his deployments overseas. He knew that look. It was the look of a dog who had given everything and expected nothing in return. But what was a K9 doing out here, abandoned with her puppies in the middle of nowhere? Questions swirled in Daniel's mind, but there was no time to think. The cold was unforgiving, and every second could mean the difference between life and death. With careful, steady hands, he scooped the puppies into his arms, feeling their tiny bodies barely moving against his chest. Then he reached for the mother. At first, she flinched, a low, broken whimper escaping her throat. But when Daniel spoke to her again, his voice calm and steady, she relaxed just enough for him to lift her. She was heavier than he expected, all muscle under the matted fur, but dangerously thin, her ribs pressing sharply against his arms. Daniel carried them back to his truck, his boots crunching through the snow, his mind racing. Inside the truck, he cranked the heat to full blast, wrapping the dogs in every spare piece of clothing he could find. The puppies whimpered softly, their tiny paws reaching for their mother. Daniel watched, his throat tight. "You're not dying today," he muttered fiercely. "Not on my watch." He needed to get them to help, fast. The nearest town was still 30 miles away, and his cell phone had no signal this far out. Gritting his teeth, Daniel threw the truck into gear and sped down the icy road, one hand steadying the bundle of life beside him. As he drove, he kept glancing at the mother dog. Her eyes fluttered open and closed, fighting to stay conscious. She pressed her muzzle weakly against her puppies, offering them what little warmth she had left. Daniel felt something stir deep inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. A sense of purpose, a sense of duty beyond uniforms and battlefields. He wasn't just saving a life today, he was saving a story. one of survival, of loyalty, of unbreakable love between a mother and her children. And he vowed then and there, he wouldn't let her story end in the cold. Not like this. Ahead, the snowy horizon stretched endlessly, a ribbon of white against a gray sky. The town was still far away. The mother dog's breathing was growing shallower. Daniel pressed harder on the gas, praying the truck would hold out, praying that fate, for once, would be on their side. He didn't know it yet, but this moment, this desperate to race against death, would mark the beginning of a bond that would change his life forever. And soon, Daniel would uncover the heartbreaking truth about the German Shepherd frozen on the road, and why she had been left behind. The truck skidded slightly as Daniel pushed it harder, the tires struggling for grip on the frozen road. He tightened his hands around the steering wheel, feeling every nerve in his body tense. The heater was blasting, but the cold had already seeped deep into the little family, curled up beside him. The mother dog lay across the passenger seat, her breathing shallow and labored. Her puppies, tiny, shivering bundles of fur, were nestled against her side, clinging to the last scraps of warmth she could offer. Daniel glanced over at them every few seconds, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Hang on, girl," he whispered under his breath. "Just a little longer." In the distance he saw it, the faint outlines of a gas station on the outskirts of the next town. Light, shelter, help. He pressed down harder on the accelerator. As he pulled into the snowy lot, he barely managed to stop the truck before jumping out and running inside. The bell over the door jingled sharply as he burst into the small convenience store, drawing startled looks from the elderly man behind the counter. "Is there a vet nearby?" Daniel gasped, his breath coming out in sharp clouds. "An emergency clinic? Anything?" The man blinked, then nodded quickly. "About 5 minutes up the road. Follow Main Street till you see the red barn. It's right past there." Without wasting another second, Daniel sprinted back to the truck. Inside, the mother's eyes fluttered weakly. She tried to lift her head but failed. One of the puppies let out a tiny, desperate whimper. Daniel's chest tightened painfully. "You're going to make it," he promised, his voice fierce. "I swear." He drove like a man possessed, following the man's directions through the slushy streets. As he rounded a corner, he saw it. A small brick building with a battered sign out front. Northridge Animal Clinic. Relief flooded him. He pulled up crookedly by the entrance, grabbed his jacket full of puppies in one arm, and gently lifted the mother dog with the other. The door flew open before he even reached it. A woman in scrubs, the vet, or maybe a tech, rushed toward him. "My God," she breathed. "Bring them in, quick!" Inside, the clinic smelled of antiseptic and warmth. Daniel carefully laid the mother and her puppies on a padded table as staff swarmed around them. "What's their story?" the vet asked briskly, already checking the mother's vitals. "Found them by the highway," Daniel said, "frozen, barely breathing." The vet, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, nodded grimly. "She's a fighter," she said. "But she's on the edge. These puppies, too. We'll do everything we can." Daniel stood back, helpless, as they hooked the mother up to warm IV fluids, wrapped the puppies in heated blankets, and monitored their temperatures. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, the vet approached him, pulling off her gloves. "They're not out of the woods yet," she said. "But you got them here just in time. Another hour, maybe less. They wouldn't have made it." Daniel let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His hands were shaking, from adrenaline, from fear, from the enormity of what almost happened. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. The vet gave him a small smile. "Thank you," she corrected. "You saved them." As the staff continued working, Daniel sat down heavily in a worn chair by the wall, staring at the little family fighting for their lives. He felt responsible for them now. Deeply, fiercely responsible. He couldn't just walk away. A nurse approached him a little while later holding a clipboard. "Sir, we're going to need some information for the records." Daniel nodded automatically. "Also," she added gently, "we'll need to know what you want to do if they survive." He looked up at her, the question sinking deep into his chest. He could already feel it. This wasn't just a rescue. It was the beginning of something much bigger. As he glanced at the mother dog, who, despite her pain, kept pushing her nose gently toward her puppies, Daniel made a decision. One that would change all of their lives forever. Daniel stayed at the clinic long after the sun went down. The mother dog, still weak but alive, slept fitfully on a soft bed the staff had arranged for her. Her two tiny puppies, wrapped in warm cloths and connected to gentle heating pads, nestled beside her, their small chests rising and falling in fragile rhythm. The vet, Dr. Harper, checked on them regularly, offering Daniel updates he clung to like lifelines. "They're fighters," she said once, with a tired smile. "Just like their mother." Daniel sat by the window, watching the snow fall in thick, silent sheets outside. He hadn't planned to spend his day, or his night, this way. He hadn't planned to care so much. But somehow, in the space of a few short hours, everything inside him had shifted. He thought of the battles he had fought overseas, the brothers he had lost, the loyalty he had seen only in the purest of moments, life or death moments. That same loyalty was reflected now in the way the mother dog refused to rest unless her puppies were close enough to touch. He felt it, a bond forming. By midnight, Dr. Harper approached him again. "She needs a name," she said softly. "If she pulls through, and I think she will, she deserves one." Daniel looked at the battered Toon, her ears twitching slightly as if she could still hear them despite her exhaustion. A name surfaced in his mind before he could stop it. "Honor," he said. Dr. Harper tilted her head. "It suits her." "And the puppies?" she asked. Daniel walked over to the bed, crouching down beside the tiny figures curled against their mother. One was slightly larger, with a fierce, stubborn wiggle even in sleep. The other was smaller, frailer, but clung just as tightly to life. "Valor," he said, pointing to the bigger one. "And hope," he added, his voice catching slightly as he looked at the tiny runt. "Honor, valor, hope." 3 names woven together by survival. The next morning brought new battles. Though Honor's temperatures had stabilized, the puppies remained critical. Dr. Harper warned Daniel that the first 48 hours were the most dangerous. "They're strong," she reassured him, "but so small. They'll need round-the-clock care." Without hesitation, Daniel offered. "I'll do it," he said. He wasn't sure what had taken over him. Logic told him he was crazy. His life wasn't built for tiny, fragile creatures. His apartment was barely big enough for himself. His next deployment orders were waiting, but he couldn't walk away. Not from them. He spent the next 2 days sleeping in the clinic's uncomfortable chairs, feeding the puppies tiny droplets of formula through a syringe every 2 hours, stroking Honor's head when she whimpered through her nightmares. Honor began to trust him quickly. At first, her tail barely moved. Just the slightest thump of recognition whenever he entered the room. But soon, she started lifting her head, nudging his hand for attention, offering soft whines of gratitude when he settled beside her. It was the kind of loyalty Daniel had seen in the best canines overseas. The kind that was earned, never demanded. As the days passed, Valor grew stronger, yipping and wriggling during feedings. Hope was slower to catch up, but her spirit was undeniable. She fought for every breath, every heartbeat, every drop of milk, with a ferocity that made Daniel's chest ache with pride. He wasn't just saving them anymore. They were saving him too. Piece by piece, Daniel felt parts of himself he thought were gone beginning to mend. The parts that had been hollowed out by war, by loss, by loneliness. It wasn't just their survival at stake. It was his own. And deep down, he knew that the biggest battle still lay ahead, because someone, somewhere had abandoned Honor and her puppies in the freezing wilderness. And Daniel was determined to find out who and why. The fourth day brought more than hope. It brought questions Daniel could no longer ignore. Honor was healing faster now. She could sit up, wag her tail weakly, and nuzzle her puppies with the fierce protectiveness of a mother who had faced death and won. Valor and hope grew stronger by the hour, their tiny bodies filling out, their eyes beginning to open into the softest shades of blue-gray. But in between bottle feedings and careful petting sessions, something gnawed at Daniel's mind. Who had left them out there? Dr. Harper had raised the question too, during one of her rounds. "She's clearly a trained dog," she pointed out, adjusting Honor's IV. "See the notches in her ear? That's a standard canine military identification mark." Daniel nodded grimly. He had seen enough service dogs in his time to recognize it too. Honor wasn't just any stray. She had been a soldier, and someone had thrown her away like garbage. The thought made his blood boil. After checking with the town clerk and making a few phone calls to local shelters, Daniel confirmed the worst. No reports of a missing dog matching Honor's description. No rescues. No adoptions pending. It was as if she had simply disappeared or been made to disappear. He couldn't let it go. One afternoon, after making sure the little family was safe and warm at the clinic, Daniel climbed back into his truck and drove to the outskirts of town. He followed the highway back to the spot where he had first found them, parking on the side of the road where the snow was still disturbed from his desperate stop. The place looked even colder, even lonelier in the daylight. He climbed out of the truck and began walking, scanning the ground carefully. It didn't take long. Half hidden by a snowdrift, he spotted something, the remnants of a crate. Old, cracked plastic with a broken door dangling by one hinge. There were scuff marks in the dirt and snow, as if something son or someone had struggled. Beside the crate, half buried in the slush, lay a torn piece of fabric. Daniel picked it up carefully. It was part of a uniform. Military issue. Camouflage patterned. His gut twisted. Somewhere along the line, Honor had belonged to someone in service, and they had abandoned her, or worse. Anger rose like bile in Daniel's throat. He had seen a lot of darkness in his life, but this, betrayal of a soldier, even a four-legged one, sickened him more than he could say. He took photos of the crate and the fabric with his phone, documenting everything. He would find out who had done this. He owed Honor that much. Back at the clinic, Daniel found Honor sitting up, her ears pricking slightly when she saw him enter. Valor yipped excitedly at the sound of his boots on the tile floor. Even little Hope wriggled with surprising strength, her eyes fluttering open to see her world for the first time. Daniel knelt down beside them, running a hand through Honor's thick fur. "I found where they left you," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know who yet, but I'm not giving up." Honor leaned into him, her body warm and steady against his side. A silent promise passed between them. Neither of them would face the world alone again. Later that night, while Daniel sat feeding Hope from a tiny bottle, Dr. Harper entered with a serious look on her face. "You might want to see this," she said, handing him a tablet. On the screen was a news article from 2 years ago, about a military base not far from where he had found Honor. The article detailed budget cuts, a controversial decision to decommission several K9 units, and, buried in the comments section, whispered rumors that not all the dogs had been safely rehomed. Some had simply vanished. Daniel felt the weight of those words settle in his chest like a stone. Honor hadn't just been abandoned. She had been erased, thrown away after years of loyal service. And whoever was responsible had gotten away with it, so far. But Daniel knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let them get away with it any longer. Not while he still had breath in his body. Because honor, valor, and hope weren't just survivors. They were a family now. And Daniel would fight for them, no matter what it took. The next morning brought an icy rain that slicked the streets and turned the snowbanks into gray, slushy rivers. Daniel sat in his truck outside the Northridge Animal Clinic, staring at the tablet Dr. Harper had given him the night before. The more he read, the angrier he became. The decommissioned K-9 units were supposed to have been retired with honor, placed in homes, treated like the heroes they were. But somewhere in the chaos of budget cuts and disbanded teams, some of the dogs had simply vanished. Paperwork had been lost. Records had been misfiled. No one had been held accountable. Honor had likely been one of them. Discarded, pregnant, left to die in the cold. Daniel clenched his fists on the steering wheel. He couldn't stand the thought. He wouldn't. A knock at the window made him jump. It was Dr. Harper, bundled up in a thick coat, holding a manila folder. "I found something," she said as Daniel rolled down the window. He took the folder, flipping it open. Inside were old military records, a K-9 service file. A photograph clipped to the top showed a proud German Shepherd sitting tall beside a handler in uniform. Her name was different then, Delta. Daniel stared at the photo. The eyes were unmistakable. It was Honor. The handler's name was listed clearly, Sergeant Kyle Monroe. Dr. Harper tapped the page. "I checked," she said. "Monroe left the service under less than honorable circumstances, disciplinary issues. He's living in a town about an hour west of here now." Daniel's stomach twisted. He knew what he had to do. It took less than 2 hours to find Monroe. Daniel parked across the street from a rundown house with peeling paint and a sagging porch. A rusted truck sat in the driveway, its bumper held on by duct tape. The neighborhood was quiet, the air heavy with the smell of rain and wood smoke. Daniel watched the house for a long moment before getting out. As he approached, the door creaked open. Kyle Monroe stood in the doorway, beer can in hand, eyes bloodshot and wary. "Yeah?" he barked. Daniel kept his voice calm. "I'm looking for information about a K-9 unit. A dog named Delta." Monroe's expression shifted. A flicker of recognition, then annoyance. "Don't know what you're talking about," he said, already starting to close the door. Daniel wedged his boot in the frame. "I think you do," he said, his voice hardening. "She was left to die out on Route 12 with 2 puppies." Monroe scoffed. "Not my problem. They told us we could keep 'em or leave 'em. Wasn't worth the trouble. Dumb mutt got herself knocked up." The words hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. "You abandoned her," he said, his voice low with fury. Monroe shrugged. "Wasn't just me. Whole unit got dumped when the budget cuts hit. Nobody cared. Why should I?" Daniel stared at him, disgust rising like bile. "You should have cared," he said coldly. "She trusted you." For a moment, Monroe looked almost guilty. Almost. But then he slammed the door in Daniel's face. Daniel stood there for a long second, the rain soaking into his jacket, his fists trembling with the effort to hold himself back. There was nothing he could do to Monroe now. No charges would stick. No justice would be served the way he wanted. But there was one thing he could do. He could make sure Honor, no, Delta, knew she was never going to be abandoned again. Back at the clinic, Daniel knelt beside her bed. Honor, or Delta, lifted her head as he stroked her ears gently. "Your past doesn't define you," he whispered. "You're not what he left behind. You're what you chose to become. Your Honor now." She nudged his hand with her wood, her eyes soft and trusting. Valor and Hope yipped and squirmed beside her, full of life and light. Daniel smiled, a tight knot loosening inside him. The darkness of her past would never touch them again. He had made sure of that. But as he looked down at the fragile family he had saved, and who had saved him, he knew they weren't done yet. There was still one more fight ahead. And this time, they would face it together. The first real warmth of spring crept over Northridge a few weeks later, melting the last stubborn patches of snow. Buds appeared on the trees. The ice cracked on the edges of the roads. The world was waking up, and so was Honor. Under Daniel's care, she grew stronger every day. Gone was the fragile, half-frozen dog he had found on the roadside. In her place stood a proud, alert German Shepherd, her coat thick and healthy again, her eyes bright with new life. She moved with grace, protective and watchful over her puppies, who were now plump, clumsy balls of energy chasing each other around the clinic's yard. Daniel spent every spare minute there, helping Dr. Harper with feedings, cleaning, anything he could do. But deep down, he knew it couldn't stay like this forever. They needed more. They needed a home. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange across the small town, Daniel sat with Dr. Harper on the clinic's worn-back steps, watching Honor and the puppies tumble in the grass. "You know," she said, nudging him gently with her shoulder, "they can't stay here forever." "I know," Daniel said softly. "You could adopt them," she said, half joking, half hopeful. Daniel laughed under his breath. "I live in a tiny apartment above a hardware store. No yard, no space." Dr. Harper smiled. "Maybe it's time to find a new place." The words lodged deep in Daniel's chest. He looked at Honor, sitting tall, watching Valor and Hope wrestle in the twilight. She glanced back at him with those wise, loyal eyes. She had trusted him when she had no reason to. Maybe it was time he trusted himself too. That night, Daniel sat at his kitchen table with a laptop, scanning rental listings until his eyes blurred. He circled places with yards, with space to run. He made calls. He filled out applications. 2 weeks later, he found it. A small farmhouse just outside town, surrounded by fields and trees, with a long, winding driveway and a porch big enough for a dog to stretch out in the sun. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't modern. But it was perfect. The day he moved Honor, Valor, and Hope into the farmhouse was one of the best days of Daniel's life. The puppies bounded through the open space, tumbling over each other in the tall grass. Honor explored every inch of the house carefully, sniffing the corners, checking every door and window, before finally settling at Daniel's feet with a deep, contented sigh. As he stood there, watching them claim their new home, Daniel felt something crack open inside him. A slow, powerful warmth that pushed out years of loneliness and fear. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. This was family. That night, as a soft rain drummed gently against the roof, Daniel sat on the porch with Honor stretched out beside him, Valor curled up in his lap, and Hope dozing at his feet. "You saved me, you know," he whispered into the darkness. Honor lifted her head as if she understood. "You reminded me." "What loyalty looks like," Daniel said. "What real courage means. It's not about fighting wars or winning medals. It's about never giving up on the ones you love." Honor rested her head against his leg, a soft, heavy weight full of trust. For a long time, they sat there in the quiet. The only sounds, the gentle sighs of sleeping puppies and the soft whisper of the rain. But deep inside, Daniel knew this wasn't the end of their journey. It was only the beginning. Because true loyalty doesn't fade with time. It only grows stronger. And whatever the future held, they would face it, together. Inside the farmhouse, tucked among the few possessions Daniel had brought with him, sat a small wooden plaque he had hung over the fireplace, It read simply, Honor, Valor, Hope. 3 names that meant survival. 3 names that meant family. 3 names that had given Daniel Reeves a second chance at life, just when he needed it most. Months passed, and the farmhouse slowly filled with life. The garden bloomed with wildflowers. The fields turned lush and green under the summer sun. Birds sang from the trees, and the air carried the scent of rain and fresh-cut grass. It was a world far removed from the icy road where Daniel had first found Honor and her puppies, clinging to life. Valor and Hope grew fast, shedding their clumsy puppy awkwardness and blossoming into strong, vibrant young dogs. Valor was bold and protective, always first to the door when a stranger approached. Hope, though smaller, had a fierce heart, clever, fast, and always the first to sense Daniel's moods. And Honor became the true guardian of the house. She followed Daniel everywhere, to town, on hikes through the woods, to quiet afternoons on the porch. Her past as a canine was never far behind her. It lived in the way she scanned every horizon, how she placed herself between Daniel and any perceived threat. But she also found something new here: peace. She no longer needed to fight for her place in the world. She had found it. One evening, as a golden sunset painted the sky, Daniel sat on the porch steps, tossing a ball lazily for Valor and Hope. Honor lay beside him, her head resting on his knee. A battered truck pulled into the driveway, the mail carrier dropping off a thick, official-looking envelope. Daniel tore it open and read the letter carefully. It was from the military. After months of pushing, of writing letters, of filing complaints, Daniel's petition had been heard. They were officially recognizing Honor's service. She was being awarded a medal for her years of loyalty and sacrifice, an honor she had been denied when she was abandoned. Daniel stared at the letter, a lump rising in his throat. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was validation. It was justice. He folded the letter carefully and looked down at Honor, who thumped her tail lazily against the porch. "You did it, girl," he whispered. "They see you now. The world sees you." On the day of the ceremony, Daniel dressed in his old uniform. It was tighter than it used to be, but it felt right. Honor wore a new leather collar, polished until it gleamed. They stood together on the small stage in town, surrounded by friends, neighbors, and even a few news cameras. As the mayor pinned the medal onto Honor's collar, Daniel knelt beside her, feeling the weight of the moment settle deep in his chest. People clapped and cameras flashed, but Honor stayed calm, steady. The same brave soul she had always been. Afterward, dozens of people came to shake Daniel's hand and pet Honor. Children hugged Valor and Hope, laughing as the young dogs tumbled around their legs. It was more than Daniel ever expected, more than he ever dared to dream. That night, back at the farmhouse, they celebrated quietly, just the 4 of them. Daniel grilled steaks in the backyard while Valor and Hope chased fireflies. Honor lay by the fire pit, a queen surveying her kingdom. Daniel sat beside her, feeling the night settle soft and warm around them. "You saved me, Honor," he said quietly, stroking her thick fur. "You reminded me that loyalty doesn't die. It just waits for the right heart to find it again." Honor lifted her head, resting it against his shoulder, and together they watched the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. Daniel closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of earth and wood smoke and dog fur. In that moment, he understood something he had never quite grasped before. Home wasn't a place. Home was a bond, forged by loyalty, hardened by sacrifice, and sealed by love. And as long as they had each other, they would never be lost again. Not in the snow, not in the dark, not in the endless march of time. They were bound, not by blood, but by something even stronger. They were a family, and together they had found their way home. If this story touched your heart, remember, Loyalty and love can overcome any storm. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this video with someone who believes in second chances. Let's keep spreading stories of courage, hope, and the unbreakable bond between humans and their canine heroes.